Hello, my name is Dan Humberg. I represent HarvestFires.com. This is an instructional video to help you with the installation of a fire stop kit on a John Deere combine. The kit that I'm installing is going onto right now onto a 9650 combine. The same kit will fit generally a 9760 combine if it's the STS version. I think that the engine changed when they went to the bullet rotor design, and so you may need the kit from a John Deere 9770. At least that's the way the one that I have designed it should fit that one. If you have a 9760 with a bullet rotor design. The combine I'm on right now is a 9650, and it's the older engine, and so this kit is designed to fit on this one, and I'm going to show you how to fit the tin to the hot components on the engine and get it installed. Before we begin that process, I always make a cautionary statement at the beginning of these that although this kit is designed to stop the chronic fires that you tend to have when you're harvesting a volatile crop like sunflowers, it will not necessarily stop every fire that you could possibly ever have on the combine. You can ignite a fire with a hot bearing, you can ignite a fire with an electrical short, you can ignite a fire with a rock and a spark, you can ignite a fire with a failing alternator. There are questions about igniting fires with static electricity. However, the work that we did at the university strongly suggests that the vast majority of the chronic fires occur when the volatile dust from the sunflower stem encounters the exhaust components on the engine, particularly the turbocharger and the first part of the exhaust system before and after that. And so this system is very good at stopping that ignition source, and so it greatly reduces the number of incidences that you have fire on the machine. But just be warned that I can't guarantee that you will never, ever have a smolder on your combine with this kit on there. So still be cautious, be careful, try and keep the machine clean and be vigilant for those fires. All right, let's do a little look around here, and I'll show you what I've done in order to prepare for the tin installation. I've taken off on this machine, I'm standing in the hole between the engine and the grain tank, underneath the grain tank extensions here, and I have taken off the step that goes above that is installed above the engine. That's two pieces. There's this large piece here, and then I took off this bracket on the left that goes right underneath here as well, just to give myself room. I'm not actually certain whether we're going to be able to put that step back on when we have the tin kit in place. If we can't, and you want that step in there, you might have to modify it to raise it up a little bit so that it doesn't sit quite as low, otherwise, because it may interfere with the tin. Our tin enclosure is going to enclose this muffler as well as the turbocharger and the exhaust manifold, and that step sits down kind of over this, and so it may interfere with the tin. So if you want that step back on in place, you may have to modify the way it's mounted so that it doesn't drop down quite as low. You could raise it up about 2 inches, and that might make it work. Otherwise, you could probably leave it out, but you'd have to figure out how to step in here without crushing the tin, because the tin itself isn't very strong. So we've got access to the engine now, and we're going to install a set of tin that will enclose the exhaust manifold here against the engine block, the turbocharger down here, and enclose the muffler. And I've got tin pieces formed up to do that. If you haven't already looked at it or haven't considered that, there's a video that should be posted in the same area that you found this one that would show you how to bend that tin up from the laser cut pieces that represent that kit. So let's get started with the first piece of the tin installation. All right, the first piece that we're going to put on is actually the piece that's numbered 2. Every part has a number, and so it's piece number 2, kind of a box-shaped piece here that will fit down over the exhaust manifold. You should have already bent it up, and so it should have an end that's bent down but not tightly closed up here yet. That will slide in over the far end of the manifold, and the piece will slide down here onto with this flange onto the head. Now the very first thing I had to do on this one was to cut here to fit around this I'm not sure what it is. It has to do with the cooling system. There's antifreeze underneath it. And it kind of gets in the way here a little bit. Our piece needs to go down to the flat surface of this aluminum, probably a heat shield that's here, and it needs to kind of go over the top of this, whatever you want to call that flat piece there. That comes up about 3/16 of an inch, and so I've cut in here on both sides of that, marked it with a Sharpie, and then cut in both sides. I bent this up to get it out of the way right now, but if I was permanently installing this one, I would probably just take that piece off and cut up here so that I had about 3/16 of an inch, maybe a quarter of an inch of clearance here, and then back down. This will work for this demonstration. And if you get enough clearance there, then this flange will fit flat down on to that aluminum heat shield on the head. I also cut a little notch around this. I pulled a bolt out here. I tried to pull one of these out, but you lose coolant as soon as you start to loosen that one up, and I don't want to mess with that. So I pulled this one. I think the only purpose of that bolt is to hold this aluminum heat shield down. So I pulled that bolt out and its washer off, cut a little notch underneath it, and then we can trap this piece by putting that washer and bolt back in place there. Snug that one down, and it holds this piece tightly in place. I would get rid of this hunk here because it's just in the way, but I won't do that because I'm on a dealer lot and I'll be taking this off. I'll do that later. So that's actually piece number 2, and so it now rises up from the head up and goes over the manifold and then goes back down. The next piece number 3, that's going to have to come in from the side where I'm at here, and it actually boxes in the intake manifold. That's underneath here. I don't really want to enclose the intake manifold, but you can enclose the exhaust manifold without also getting the intake manifold. And so I'm going to come in from underneath, and we'll slide this around the intake manifold, and this large piece here will actually slide all the way under and enclose the exhaust manifold in here, and slip. This edge will fit into kind of a slot up against in the block, or at least between a component and the block. So there's kind of more or less a little bit of a recess there that this will go into. Now it's not as easy, it's much easier said than done, because this piece has, the intake manifold has a couple of sensors here that we're going to have to work around. And so I'll get that installed, but then I'll come back and give you a demonstration or show you how to do it as well. I'm going to show you how to fit the next piece. The piece is number 3. It's got a 3 scribed with an underscore here. And I've done some fitting on this one, and I'll show you what I had to do to fit it. I would suggest I'm not going to change the design because there seem to be different versions of this engine and intake manifold, and they've moved some of the parts around, so I can't be absolutely certain where you're going to encounter them. The parts will be there, but they may not be in exactly the same spot. So this is the top of this part. It's going to cover the intake manifold and go underneath the exhaust manifold here, and it'll run in, and there's kind of a little bit of a recess between those components up to the block, and this edge of this piece will fit into that. Once you finally get it there, it will kind of snap in there or fit into that spot. I did some trimming in a couple places. I took off some pieces right here. This flange here extended out to about where my finger is there, about like that, and I cut that piece off because it just gets in the way, and you can't get it to the screw hole on the end of it anyway because it's behind the compressed air line. I also took off this last flange that was right here because on this particular one there's a clamp screw that's right in the way that clamps the rubber hose on there. Again, I wouldn't. You have to check and fit your own because they may move that clamp from one machine to another, or from one version to another. So I did some trimming there to make it fit in my case. On the bottom here, I had a little dip in here to fit around a, let's see, I'm going to look at it. I'm not sure what the line is, if it's a line that takes a coolant or if it's a heater line for the thing, if you're going to heat it. I don't know. Anyway, it goes into the intake manifold. Looks kind of like a hydraulic hose. It's a crimped rubber hose crimped onto a fitting that goes up into the bottom of the intake manifold. But on this particular one, it actually penetrates. It has to penetrate this piece. It has to come down through it, and it occurs right about here, and instead of back in here real deep. And that may be the case on yours, or it may be that on your version it's back here. Depends on whether you're running a 9650 or 9760 or something like that. Anyway, I cut it back all the way into here. That was a bit of a mistake. I shouldn't have gone quite that far. I should have test fit it a little bit at a time. But I cut a slot in here at an angle because in order to fit it in there and get it around the oil return line from the turbo bearing, you had to kind of come in at an angle here. And so I cut in here and then should have cut right around here. This is where that piece comes through. And then I bent this open a little bit without cutting this off. I just bent this open so we can slip it around I think it's a steel crimped line, but it's about 1/4 inch in diameter. We can slip it in there. Once I've mounted this, I would probably try to close this back up if I could. I'd try to bend that back in place, either with a push tool or a hammer or something like that, bend it back up. The other thing you have to fit around is there's a ether line that goes into your intake manifold. It's a brass fitting that comes down and points this direction, and then has a little thin line that goes to your ether can, I think. Anyway, I disconnected the little fitting that allows that long line, that long little tiny line that connects it there, so you can drop that down. That line stays underneath this, so it stays on the bottom side of it. And there's a big enough hole here. The whole original hole was right here, and I extended it this way about 1/2 inch, and that allows the brass fitting that's on the bottom of the intake manifold to drop down through there, and then we can hook that ether line back up once this piece is in place. So those are the cuts that I made to adjust this piece so that it'll fit on there. You're going to just have to try it, and it'll be a little frustrating. This is probably the toughest piece on the kit to make fit in place, but you can do it. And you may have to reach in and pop these edges up or down a little bit to make them find that gap or that slot between the manifold and the block and the head and all that stuff. These keyhole openings, I would just barely open them to the bottom. We probably got enough leaks here that we don't need to pour out air anywhere else at this point. So now if I go down here, I can slip this in place. I have to make sure it's on top of the ether line. And then there's a soft line that's the return line from the turbo bearing here, and you don't want to cut that with this. This edge isn't real sharp, but it's kind of hard. And so we pull that out of the way. I actually took this little clamp or a little thing that holds it in place. I just bent that out of the way so we can move it a little bit temporarily. I'm going to put you underneath here so that you can see what I'm feeling. I've done it enough times that I can almost do it by feel right now. But you want to see what you're looking at probably. Okay, I got to come back out. There we go. Okay, when we finally get it in place, I've got just a little bit of clearance here around this line, and notice the brass fitting there that's coming down. That we'll put this ether line back into the end of that. So now the piece is loose, but it's fit in place. The bottom part of it is restrained by there's just not space for it to move up or down in here, so it kind of fits. It's not tight, but it's restrained in there. And if we come back up to the top side, Back in here there's a series of screw holes, and I've got the bottom piece on top right now, but if I pull that up, slip this in, then that piece can come down on top, and we can get screws in there to lock these two together. The other thing you'll need to do is to lift these fingers up here to fit around that curved line, and then squish them back down in place to fit close around that piece. So I'm going to see if I can get some screws in there to connect those right now. I've got my long screwdriver. Okay, I've gotten 3 screws in there. Once you get 2 screws in, or even 1 screw in, the other holes tend to line up because it pulls them into line. I ended up loosening this bolt a little bit so I could shift that upper piece of tin just a little bit to be able to make that join up, or those holes line up. Now I've got 2 left that I could do. I'm not going to do those right now for time's sake, but then you'll notice here we've got these fingers that fit around that flex line, and then we've got this end cap here, and we can fold that end cap up in place. I'm going to back off a minute here. I've got a piece of sheet metal here. I didn't take it off because I was hoping to avoid that since this isn't a permanent installation. But for your purposes, if I was you, I'd probably pull, I think 3 bolts there and 1 here that hold that piece in place so that you could take that out. It'll give you more room to work around this end of the manifold for this part. But in my case now, I'd reach in under here and close this up, push this bottom piece up in place, bend it in place, and there are some holes in that one that will line up with the piece that we folded down around the end up here. It's folded down in the end of that one, and if you can get those holes to line up there, you can't really see it from here, but you'd have to reach back in with a stubby screwdriver. You can put a screw or 2 through there and pull that end cap, those 2 pieces together, and it'll tighten that up around the end of the manifold, and you want to do that. The other piece we can put in place there is this piece. It doesn't look like it would be all that necessary on this one. This is a 9650. On a 9760, they changed that rubber line, that air line there, and put a different hose clamp on it, and it made it really difficult to fit around. So this piece was made just to fit around that. I'm going to see if I can put that in place now. Alright, I got 2 screws in here, and that brings this piece up closer to around that rubber line. And there is also, you can see in here, we also should have a hole right there that we could put, and if we've got this all pressed into place, there's a good chance that we could get a screw through there from that end with this stubby driver and hold that together as well. Again, this is a temporary installation. I'm not going to take your time to do that because I'm going to take it apart, but you try to get a screw in that hole, that one right there, if possible. Looks like maybe there's, I don't know if there's more than one there or not. I'm feeling it, I can't see it. But we want to do that to try to keep this gap here as small as possible. Once you have this piece covering that manifold in place and it's tied on there, and the end cap is tied in place so that that's closed up, then you can put this ether line back in, connect it back up to its brass fitting. There's a little compression nut or brass nut here that you slide it back into its fitting and thread that on and snug that one back up. Just don't forget to do that. Alright, our next piece is number 5. It is going to fit down inside the turbocharger bearing, and it has 2 flanges here that are going to fit just inside the two pieces we've already put on, and it's going to go down from the top, but I've already test fitted it once and I have trouble getting it in there. I'm going to trim about 1/8 of an inch off of this cutout here just to enlarge it slightly, and then we'll try that one again. I've trimmed some off of that piece right along here, and I think that it will probably fit now. We drop it in from above or slip it down in from above. It's a tight fit alongside the bolts on the compressor housing. It should fit inside or on top of the let me show you. These holes are the larger pilot holes, so the screw has to go through here first. So these are on the outside of the piece that we're going to screw it to. I can see one pilot hole down at the bottom that I hopefully can reach with the screw and a long driver. I'm going to try and get that one first. That's one. Alright, I cut a little bit more off that piece. Now we're going to drop it down through there and screw it on one more time. So this little pan handle up here stays up on top. Alright, there are 4 screw holes in that piece, in the flanges in that piece, but I think you can only hit 2 of them with screws, one from above and one from behind here shooting crossways. Let's see whether I can reach that one. I can look down from above to find it. Okay, I got 2 screws in, that will hold it together. So that piece is in place. Now this piece joins it from the back. I originally made this as a single piece, those 2 as a single piece, but there was no way to physically fit them in there, so I had to cut them and recut it as 2 pieces. And then there's a series of screw holes here, 6, that would overlap. You only need to hit maybe 2 of them, but I gave lots of options because they're hard to reach. So this is going to slide in here. And it will join to that other piece, and it looks like I probably need to cut a little out of this flange to clear that oil return line from the turbo bearing there. So I'm going to trim that a little bit to get myself, I don't want it to rub on that line. There went one screw in. Alright, that's 2 screws in that, holding that together. If you can get a 3rd one in, that's great. If you can't, 2 will probably hold it together. I shot that in from the right hand end over the right hand end of the manifold with a long drill driver, or you could do it with a manual screwdriver, but it needs to be about 1 foot long. Okay, the next piece to go on is piece number 7. It's going to go over the top of the turbo bearing here. It's not hard to reach things on this one, but it looks to me like I'm going to need to deepen this cut around the turbocharger bearing shape here a little bit, maybe about like that, just to make it deeper so this will come up a little higher. I'll do that and come back to you. Alright, I made that cut, deepened it somewhat, and take a pliers and flatten out the edges. The tin snips distorts the edge a little bit. Now we'll try it again. It goes right up against the compressor. This is the compressor here, and it goes right up against those bolts that hold the compressor in place. Looks like it's going to work. Alright, that holds that piece in place for now. Alright, we're looking at piece number, I'm not sure if it's 8 or 9, I think it's 8. This piece is going to cover the near end of the muffler, and it's going to go in all the way underneath the right hand end of the exhaust manifold and intake manifold. Now, the piece fits in like this underneath here, and most of the way there's a kind of a gap or a space for this to slip into. There's a couple of places where John Deere in their infinite wisdom decided to not do that, and so there's a bump out of something there that gets in the way of this. I slid it in a couple of times and then looked at it, slid it in place, and then looked where it was hitting, and I took a couple of curved cuts out of here. This one's in about 1, 2, 3 inches in from the end here. This one's a little, the other side of this little cut here. Anyway, by doing that, I think it allows it to get in more or less flush all across that the end of it here, and I think it'll fit all right. The little bit of gap that we have around here won't bother anything. If you can see this hole is where the oil return line from the turbocharger bearing drops down through here. It's a hard line at this point. It's a steel line, and then below this it converts to a rubber hose. So we've got a steel line going through here, but I don't want the face of this, the edge of this, ever to abrade or vibrate on that steel line. So I've bent these faces right here down only about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch of metal, but bent it down 90 degrees so I have a smooth face here. So if it does encounter that oil line, it'll just be a smooth face touching it and not a hard rough edge of where the laser cut it. So let's see if we can fit this piece in place now. Okay, the piece slips under there. Oh, and one other thing. There's another little bent tab that holds the ether line, that little thin, skinny ether line that runs through there. And that tab is held by one of the bolts that is one of the intake manifold bolts. And so there's no way to keep that ether line on the outside of this in that clamp and still have it in that clamp and stay on the outside of this. So I took it out of that clamp. You may want to explore a way to restrain that so that it doesn't flop around and become damaged at all if it vibrates as well. Right now I have no way to tie it on to something because the clamp will be inside this and the ether line will be outside. We slide this in place and then slide it to the left so that it straddles or goes around that oil return line. When we get it in the right place, the edge of this edge will line up, and there are screw holes there that we can use to tie it down. a little bit hard to hold it and load the screw gun at the same time, but there's one screw. Alright, it's hanging there a little bit, but it is now tied on. I can also go underneath, and I've got 2 screw holes underneath this that I can hit, should be able to hit. The holes should line up from the bottom. I'm going to switch to a shorter driver. Sometimes you just have to dive under here. Alright, we got that screwed on along this edge and this edge. The bottom is supported there, and we'll tie it up over the top with the next piece. And I also check around that oil line to make sure I've got some clearance. Right now I've got about a 1/4 inch clearance all the way around that oil line. Alright, we got a large piece to put on here. Number is number 1. It's piece number 1. It's numbered right here. Should have this patent number on it. I had to do some modifications to it in order to make it fit on this machine. There was a tab here. I took that tab out, and I took a little bit more material, maybe a 1/4 inch off of this end, in addition to taking the tab off. That's going to allow it to fit around this raised piece here. So it'll skip that, it'll come up over the edge of it and go back down here, rest on this edge. The other hole I had to make here, cut in this one, and I just laid it on there, marked it, and cut around it so that it can go around this big bolt. I made a mark here and here, and then laid it on there so I could see where the bolt was going to be. Marked it on this, and then cut that little piece out. The other thing that we've got going on with this one is that I have not encountered on other Deere machines that ran this engine is this shield. It's real close to the end of the muffler. I think it's designed to deflect air down to flush the dust off of that hydrostatic valve block down there. That's a complex pump and valve block, or whatever. It's a hydraulic. And I think they want to try and keep that as free of dust as possible, so they're taking the engine air blast and routing it down there. Now in this case, it's going to encounter the top of our piece, or our enclosure. That's where this fits. For right now, we're looking at the fold up top of the thing here, and then here's the exhaust pipe coming out of the muffler. And this edge for that piece wants to cut through our enclosure a little bit. And so I've cut a notch in this for right now, but we're going to have to see what do we want to do with the end pieces there. That's going to be the dilemma. Personally, if it was my machine and I was mounting this on it, I'd probably cut a notch out of this piece, in that it'll function just fine with a notch cut around it, and then we can finish this box. But I don't want to do this. I'm on a dealer lot borrowing a machine, and I don't want to do that. You'll have to decide how you want to route around that on your machine. Personally, I think that piece, a chunk of that, I think you want to leave the deflector there, but you could take a chunk out of it there and it wouldn't bother it a bit. Okay, let's see if we can get this screwed on. I need to note that this flange in the back comes up over the top of this piece when we get to that point. But for now, I'm going to start out at this outer edge out here. All right, we've got a number of screws in there. You, of course, would put them all in up this space or across the top and around this edge. Now I've got the end pieces to put in, and I'll take a look and see what we can do to fit around that bracket. All right, I took that air shield off for now. You can take it off. You can decide whether to put back on or whether you want to cut a notch out of it. Now I'm going to put this end piece in here. It's deliberately made to be able to open up these two tabs to go around the exhaust pipe, and you close it back in when you get it on there. I don't watch carefully because I don't want to have to do this more than once. This is that end piece that we fit in. We had to spread it apart to get it around the exhaust pipe. Still got a couple screws that should go in the bottom back here. If you start at the corner and work your way this way, the screw holes will line up. There are none right along here, but there are along this edge, and there are some underneath this bottom here. There are two screws there, and one in the back side here that can tie this last piece that we just put in. I just fit this last piece in place here. I didn't show myself putting it in place because I can't stand on my head and get the camera in here at the same time and hold the piece. Notice that it slips around this oil line, and right now I don't have any clearance to speak of for that oil line. I would take this off again now if I was doing this install, and I would cut little flower petals 1/4 of an inch deep all around that hole and bend those petals out so that they parallel this line, so that it's got some clearance, and so that any contact it makes would be side to side contact and not edge contact on this. So be sure to do that. I just wanted to get it fit in place. I'm losing sunlight here, and so I wanted to get it fit in place. These 3 holes were in this flange, but they were not drilled in or cut into this piece by the laser. I'll have to fix that in the model, and I'll try to do that. But if in this case I just slid the flanger on the outside and shot the screws through. They're self-drilling, self-tapping screws anyway, so I could get them, and that holds pretty well. And so the whole thing is now, that's all of the tin pieces on this enclosure. Let's come up and look at some other stuff. For the most part, this box now is on here and it can't come off because it's around too many different things, like that exhaust pipe and the turbo over here, and it's bolted down here in front in one spot, but still it's got a little bit of wiggle here. And on some of these installs, I've done a couple on this, I think on this model or this engine, even on a different model, and I took an L-shaped piece of tin, screwed it to the back, brought it up to this flange, bent it 90 degrees, and screwed it or bolted it with it, whatever, to this support piece so that this corner of the box is anchored and can't wobble up or down. I don't know that it's going to hurt anything, but I just like it to be anchored fairly well. It'll also get tighter as you go around and tighten or put in all the rest of the screws that I've left out at this point. But I just wanted to do it just to get it on here and show you how it goes together. Okay, the last thing I'll talk about that's related to tin is how we get the air in here. And we've got this. Okay, I'm looking down from the steps where I was standing on the platform looking over onto the engine here, and I've got this 4-inch hole right at the turbocharger. What we'll do here is put a HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, essentially a ductwork from your house, like a 4-inch entry piece in here. It comes with a little shoulder and it's got a bunch of fingers on it, and we can bend out about 4 of those fingers. I usually bend 4 fingers out, one on each of 4 sides. The other fingers poke in through here, and then you reach in through that and you bend those fingers out on the inside, and then you got the ones on the outside so it can't really go anywhere. Then I'll shoot a screw through each of those 4 fingers to hold it on, and then I've got some aluminum foil duct tape that I'll put around the edge of that to seal it, make sure it seals up. Onto that stub pipe, we'll put one of 2 things. We'll either put another one of those slidable flex furnace 4-inch furnace pipe pieces so that we can make part of a turn, or if we've got enough room here, we'll actually put the rubber elbow onto the end of that stub entry piece and screw that on through the rubber and into the aluminum, and then I'll tape that with that aluminum duct tape also. But essentially we want to come out of here, make a 90-degree turn, and we're going to go down over the transmission area down over there, and then we'll come up from our blower, and that'll be a little bit different segment video, and I'll show you that in that segment later. But you're going to put that furnace, that stub entry piece in here with like 4 fingers bent out, the rest of them shooting through there or around the edge inside. Reach in through it and bend those out to lock it in place, screw it on in place, then tape it to tighten it up. I don't want to lose air before we get in here. Once we're in there, we can lose air through lots of holes and it doesn't hurt anything. But we don't want to lose air before it's done us any good. So we'll try and tighten up the ducts going in. So that's the enclosure this is a 9650, I think maybe an older one that I'm working with. I've done a 9650 or 2 before, but they were newer ones than this. And then I did a 9760 that had this same engine, but there are differences. I don't know how many combines Deere actually built that were the same. I've never run into this shield that deflects air here before, and I did this time, so that's something that was different on this one. There's a difference in the way that the railings are behind me here too that changes the way we mount things on this one. So be aware that there are differences, and you could encounter places where you might have to modify the tin slightly to make it fit. I've tried to show you those on this one where we encounter them, and it's a little bit painful and tedious to put this on there, but once we've got it on there, now we've got an enclosure we can pump filtered air into, and we won't get any dusty air won't be able to get in there back against that pressurized clean air, and so you won't get any dust reaching those hot engine components. Okay. Well, good luck with your installation. If you have questions, you can contact me at harvestfires.com. There's an email place where you're free to send an email to harvestfires@outlook.com is the email address. Good luck with your installation.